Knowing this near universal pattern helps to assess new brands and existing ones.
What don't marketers know?
Quite a lot. Marketers largely live in an anything-goes world where the latest fashion or fad drives an awful lot of practice.
Segmentation is the recognition you can't serve everyone with equal satisfaction.
This is the Zac Anesbury Show.
Welcome. On today's podcast, we have Professor Scott Koslow. Scott is a professor of marketing at Macquarie University, and he is a prolific writer. He is the only academic to feature in the top publisher list for both of the top advertising journals. He also happens to be the most published and cited scholar in the advertising creativity field. Now, Scott is not just a prolific writer, but he also happens to be a world-class reviewer, having twice won the Best Reviewer Award at one of marketing's top journals. Now let's combine that with his positions on the editorial boards of the Journal of Advertising and the Journal of Advertising Research, and you kind of know already that you're in for a bit of a treat. You're about to gain some insights about publishing within these top-tier journals and what their contents are. Now, Scott's interview also contains and displays his breadth of knowledge about consumer behaviour, panel data, price promotions, and naturally, advertising. I'm pretty excited just thinking about it. But without further ado, Professor Scott Koslow. All right, excellent. So welcome to the podcast, Scott. Thank you for taking time out to speak to us about yourself and your journey with marketing. Just for our listeners, did you want to maybe introduce yourself and give us a little bit of a background as to who you are and your sort of experience?
Well, I'm Scott Koslow. I'm professor of marketing at Macquarie University in Sydney. Hard for me to sort of say what kind of background you want me to talk about. My area of research is advertising creativity. It's an area of research that, honestly, it should be the center of what we do in advertising. It's what everybody seems to be excited about. But it's actually not one of the mainstream, well, I guess it's increasingly a mainstream topic, but it's not the stock and trade of what we do in advertising. Most of that is still some kind of consumer information processing. How do people process the ads that they see, not how do we produce an ad that has a large effect on consumers. So I started this research probably just over 20 years ago. I'm well known in the field of advertising creativity now.
Yeah, perfect. So you find yourself being an advertising sort of marketing professor now, working at Macquarie University. How long have you been there, and where did your career sort of start off in academia? Well,
I got my PhD from the University of Southern California.
Okay. So that explains the accent, I suppose?
Well, I grew up in the States.
Yeah.
So when people sort of push me for where I'm from, and I'll say the U.S., and they'll say, no, more detailed. And it's like, okay, born in Pennsylvania, grew up in Michigan, went to school in California, worked in Texas and New York, also worked in the Middle East twice, in Europe, especially London, 17 years in New Zealand at the University of Waikato. And let's see, when did I arrive? I think 2011, I arrived here in Australia at Macquarie. So it was the 1st of November, the day after Halloween. So, yeah.
And how did you find, so getting your PhD in the US and naturally moving around quite a bit, then moving to the Middle East and now Australia, how do you find the countries, their cultures and their work environments in academia or marketing in general between those sorts of different countries?
Honestly, the academic kind of traditions are not as different as I think people make it out to be. Much of what we do is very internationally transferable. A course in market research is a course in market research practically anywhere in the world. Marketing, again, intro to marketing is the same practically everywhere in the world. It's incredibly transferable.
So something that applies in the US will apply in Australia, will apply in Europe, those sorts of dynamics.
Yeah, well, the funny thing is if you take a look, say, what's the French word for marketing?
I wouldn't know the translation, actually.
Yes, you do. It's marketing.
Okay.
You'll hear them often talk about, say, speaking in French, and they'll go on, and then they'll say marketing, and it's almost in an American accent, and it's like, what? So yeah, because it is such an American kind of concept, and it's one of the fields on which the Americans have dominated across the planet. And I mean, now there's plenty of folks who are not born in the U.S. who do marketing, and it's internationalized quite well. But the perspectives are still incredibly American, or at least I should say associated with America, even though I still think the ideas come from elsewhere. But the Americans were the big disseminators of what we pedagogically call marketing today.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that would probably be what most people would think as well, with the spread of television shows like Mad Men, or from an academic perspective, like the Journal of Consumer Research or the Journal of Marketing. Those sort of old, sort of more prestigious journals are American in origin. I suppose at the Ehrenberg Bass Institute, we kind of see the concepts of the patterns that we look for in consumer behavior as applying in multiple different situations. And that's ultimately what we end up doing. Like we're not looking at just one brand for one category in one particular country and think, great, that's how consumer behavior works. We're looking at all of those brands with multiple different categories. And if it applies in Australia, then we'll say, well, can we find the same thing in America? Can we find the same thing in different parts of Europe? Does it apply in developing countries as well throughout Asia? And then we sort of know that there's this real reflection on how consumers behave. And that's why I think it's really interesting that you have this perspective as well, that the difference between how academia works in the US and Australia is less different than people may perceive, I suppose.
Oh, yeah. I've long been an advocate for standardized kinds of marketing practices and standardized advertising. I mean, certainly there's a level at which you have to localize ads, use local actors, local accents, and things like that. But, if it's really a good strategy in the U.S. and you're facing a very similar environment in Australia, you can use and should use the same strategy. But there is a tendency that you find the local managers sort of their reason for existence is somehow or another saying that their market is different. So you have brand managers who will advocate, our market's different, our market's unique. Well, it might be that the brand faces a unique environment because there's a unique set of competitors and the positioning of the brand is different in various countries. This might be the case, but in many cases it's not at all like this.
Yeah.
There's a great deal of homogeneity.
Yeah, exactly. And we used to find that more so than we are now, but I think certainly within the last sort of 5 years or so, there was organisations that would come to us who were sponsors and even some who weren't, and their question would be, yeah, that's great. You're like a pattern such as like Double Jeopardy. You may find it holding for consumer good categories, ones you typically find in a supermarket, but that won't apply for our brands, and that definitely doesn't apply for our category. And our response has always been, well, let's have a look at the data then.
And then you show that it does.
And then we show that it does. And then we can actually provide them with some quite valuable insights, I suppose. Yeah. So you've sort of, you're, a professor at Macquarie University. But I think one of the sort of key things that I'd like to know is academia is quite a unique field in terms of it's probably not one that people grow up thinking that they'll enter into. No one that I've spoken to so far for the podcast has said, when I was a little kid, I strove to be, a researcher, and I had all of these questions that I desperately needed to have answered. Was that similar to you? Like, what did you sort of grow up thinking you wanted to be, or?
I still remember being sort of like 5 years old watching television, and I found the ads the absolute most interesting. They were far more interesting than the shows.
Yeah, great. Okay,
so I've always been an ad junkie, and that's it. It's just, I get to play with the ads now. I mean, I don't work for an ad agency. I guess if I went an agency route, it would be sort of an account planning role. And in fact, I think I get along best with the account planners, and I talk the same language as account planners. At one point in time, I was doing a sabbatical at Saatchi & Saatchi in New York, and I think they kind of were hoping that I'd sort of ask them for a job.
Oh, really?
They were certainly trying to hire a lot of my PhD students. There was one PhD student in particular. So the global HR had sat me and him down in the office, and I started asking him all sorts of questions about what he wants to do and where he wants to go and so forth. And it's like, yeah, I know what you're doing. You're trying to recruit one of my sort of budding academic stars to go into account planning for you. And if the student was interested in it, that would certainly be a very good thing for the student to do. But yeah, my wife and I briefly talked about, should I try an account planning route with Saatchi's, because they drop hints, but it's like they kind of know you're an academic and you got it pretty good, so you're probably not going to consider it. It would have been, a huge amount of money more. But I think the thing for me, why I didn't want to go down that route, is, let's say I was doing an account planning role, okay? Well, if I made a mistake and we lost an account, 50 to 100 people would lose their jobs. And I didn't want that. That's a lot of stress.
Yeah, huge pressure.
To whereas in academia, what's the worst case scenario? I get a review from a journal and they say a bunch of nasty things. Honestly, that's not that terrible compared to the guilt of, I stuffed up and 100 people are unemployed now.
Yeah, exactly. So that was one of the key reasons that you decided to stay in academia?
Well, it's also a fun game. We get to do all sorts of things. We set our own pace, decide what hours we want to work, what we want to focus on. Honestly, we only have a few hours a week in which we have to show up in front of a class, and then we can say anything we darn well choose. And the kids take notes no matter how stupid you are.
Oh, I'm laughing so much because it's so true, and I like the way that you're so brutally honest with it. I have to admit, I agree with you 100%. That is one of the beautiful parts about being an academic, and primarily a research-focused academic, which I'm assuming is a large majority of your time?
Yeah. So it's 40% of my time, which is the typical percentage that it is for most academics.
Yeah, and then the rest of the time you sort of get your freedom to pursue what you want. You can, if you're, are you more of a morning person or an evening person?
Oh, it depends. Sometimes I can start writing in the morning and I'm doing pretty good. Sometimes it's sort of like, I don't know where the day went. I was busy with a bunch of things, but I don't really start getting into it until, say, in the afternoon. So it varies quite a bit. Yeah.
But you're allowed, because there's no clock in, clock out, you're allowed to focus when you need to focus.
Yeah.
At various points throughout my career, I've thought to myself, I've been a real morning person, so I've gotten up straight away, I've opened up my laptop, and I'll be writing for 2 hours, and then I'll have breakfast, and I'll go for a run, and then I'll come into work. And that was really a good mindset for me because I felt like I was ahead of the pace. And then at other times, I just couldn't focus in the morning, so I was allowed to work in those evening sort of periods. And I once asked someone, how come there's no, it's not like McDonald's, for example, where you show up to a shift and you have to put in your little unique employee number, or some people have fingerprint scanners, and they monitor our hours. And I thought to myself, well, of course they're not going to do that because they don't want to pay for all of the overtime.
Yeah, there's a lot to that.
Yeah.
Sort of when I was trying to get my research and creativity underway, I spent an awful lot of time on it. But, it's a labor of love. I can't say that if I were doing client work for a New York agency that I'd always say that this stuff was quite the same kind of labor of love. And if I was working for an agency and I'd go in on a Saturday to work, my wife would sit there and say, "You're not being paid for this. It's one thing for you to be home late on some days of the week from a work day, but no, you are not going into the office on a Saturday." But we do that as academics.
Yeah. How do you find that balance now? Because, we all have laptops and essentially our work follows us where we are. Like if we use that McDonald's example again, no one is bringing their work home with them, but we, I suppose, indirectly do, and the temptation is always right next to us. How do you manage your time or your ability to do that?
Okay, I pulled my phone out of my pocket. Okay, I will not put email on my phone.
Okay, so you have no
I
email on it.
will not put it on the phone. It's on my iPad.
Yeah.
But it's not on my iPhone.
Okay.
And I refuse to put it on there because, no, how do I say this? I've known too many salespeople who you're sitting there, you're having dinner with them, and then they get the phone call, and it's like, for Pete's sake, do you have to answer it? And it's like, but this is a big client. No.
No.
They can wait till tomorrow. At least academics, they can wait till tomorrow.
Yeah. Yeah, no one's going to die, that's for sure. It's not life and death.
Yeah.
I was once on a similar thing. I was once on holiday with someone, and they had made a promise to their wife that they were going to turn off their phone. There was no work-related information there, and they were going to spend all of their time with their family and their children and their wife. And then at one point, while we're all getting coffee, they sort of had snuck away and they were on their phone, obviously doing work-related things, and it caused this sort of riff in their communication at that point. And I kind of thought to myself as well, like I wouldn't want to get to that point where I was prioritizing work over the happiness of my family, for example. And it seems like you're doing the same thing.
Yeah, but again, in industry, you can't do it that way.
Okay, they're buying your availability, I suppose.
Well, yeah.
Yeah.
If that's what you want to call it.
Yeah, and to be you're kind of on call then.
Yeah. Well, I am trying to be, as much as I can, courteous towards any salespeople I have to deal with, to whereas I'm not calling them at 8 o'clock at night.
Yeah.
Okay? Because these guys often get the phone calls at 8 o'clock at night, and it's like, no, that is not fair to them. So I avoid it. But, honestly, there's not a lot of folks who necessarily always approach things the way that I do.
Yeah.
And they do call their salesperson at 8 o'clock at night and expect them to have something ready for the next morning.
Yeah. So you mentioned earlier that you, like as a kid, you were more fascinated with the ads than you were the TV shows. What was it about the ads that sort of drew you into it? Was there like a particular ad that you remember, or a distinct memory of sitting there thinking, this seems like something I would be interested in?
The only thing I can think of is that they're designed to hold your attention for 30 to 60 seconds. And in the hands of a good creative, they are that way. To whereas if you're talking about, say, television program or something like that, well, they're sort of there to hold your attention for 22 minutes. But, it could wane quite a bit within those 22 minutes. It's not...
Yeah. Attention spans.
Yeah.
Makes sense. And so did that then transfer over through... not necessarily to university, but did it transfer through your education? Like, did you find in high school you were picking business-related subjects or creative, or are you an artistic type person? Or
Okay, in high school, I went the typical academic kind of track. So I grew up in a blue-collar neighborhood in Detroit, so most of the folks that I went to high school with have gone into trades and things like that, or they work in various factories and the like, blue-collar kinds of jobs. So I wanted to get out of that world. I could succeed with the academic kind of route, so I did a lot of that. Made my way to the University of Michigan. But, yeah, there was no sign early on of advertising being a big issue. I think probably early on I was more interested, in fact, I was interested in economics.
Okay.
Okay, so that had some interest of mine from high school, and I was an econ major in undergrad. But then it was just a little bit too, I don't know what's the best word to describe it, too esoteric. It was this high-level kind of theory, and I wanted to know more of the detail, which that kind of reaction to economics is not a particularly unusual one. But the thing that sort of caught my eye in undergrad was voting behavior. Now, I was at the University of Michigan, and they have their, I'm trying to remember the name of the Institute for Social Research, and they do the National Election Study out of there. And they've been known doing that every 2 years since, I don't know, the 1950s. It's a long data set, big data set, and it's an important study for people to understand voting behavior in the U.S. And quite a bit of the voting behavior research originates from researchers, political science researchers at the University of Michigan, drawing from that data set. So I worked with some of these folks and studied under them, and I really liked the idea of, wow, predicting presidential elections. This is a big deal.
Yeah.
Okay. And in fact, at one point in time, I came up with a model of negative voting for congressional elections. That essentially, if you don't like what's going on, you vote against the party in control. Okay. Years later, I noticed somebody had fit that data as well. I think they probably did it better than I did, but I at least sort of had the idea early on. So I sort of was cognizant and thoughtful about voting behavior. So I was trying to think about, well, what do I want to do when I get out of undergrad? You know, what, like there's careers in voting behavior? No. So I'm talking with this one academic. He wanted to talk me into doing a PhD in political science and voting behavior. And I asked him, so what kind of jobs are there? And he sort of says, well, you know what? There aren't a lot of jobs in political science. But you know what? You could work for a market research firm. Really? Okay, because I had never thought about marketing. I like marketing. I like advertising. Let's think about this. So in the end, I did an MBA, and I really loved marketing. Still didn't think too much about advertising. I loved advertising as well, but I still thought marketing, not advertising. And then I worked for a year, after I got the MBA, I worked for a year in Silicon Valley, missed academic life, and went back and got a PhD. And I still wasn't thinking advertising. At the time, I was thinking innovations, high-tech, what was called at the time high-tech marketing. I think that word's gone away, that phrase has gone away. But that's what it was. And so I started out trying to do some kind of high-tech marketing in the PhD program. That pretty much lasted several months until I found a book by Everett Rogers called The Diffusion of Innovations.
Heard of that one?
And I looked at that book, and he again was also from the University of Southern California, but you know, it's one of the classic works, seminal work in innovations. And I looked at this book, and I sort of came to a bizarre conclusion. You know what? Everything's been done already. Okay? I can't add to this literature, so why should I? I should go off and do something else. Well, what sort of caught my eye at the time was scanner panel data. So I did my thesis on scanner panel data. Lots of people were doing stuff on scanner panel data at the time. All fine and good. My stuff, however, was very different. I took a measurement approach.
Okay.
It was more focused on, let me give you an example. Let's say you're looking at a particular consumer in a store. Now, you're going in, shopping in a store. Every week, they walk into the store, they buy different brands of laundry detergent. And let's say for 14 weeks in a row, they buy one box of laundry detergent, the identical brand, every single time. Never vary in the size, never vary in the brand. Okay? And they're always buying one box and one box only. Why are people doing what they're doing?
Habitual behavior?
Yeah, that's one inference you can make. Anything else?
There could only be one brand in the supermarket itself.
Okay, well, actually, there were multiple brands.
Okay, there's multiple brands. I'm not quite sure.
There's a whole bunch of reasons. It might be they like the brand.
Yeah.
It might be that it has some special feature that works well with whatever issues they come up with in terms of their problem. They might not even be aware that they're buying the same brand all the time.
Yeah.
Okay? But, half of all consumers in various categories end up buying the same brand all the time. Why do they do that? Stuff if we know, all right? Now, if I turned around and said, if the person walks in the following week and for 14 weeks they've always bought the same brand, what brand are they going to buy?
Your money would be on that brand, wouldn't it?
It would be on the same brand. So what you end up with that is that you can predict the behavior, but you can't understand it.
Yes.
Okay? All right. Here's another consumer. They walk into a store and they see that there's a cents off promotion for a particular brand. They buy that one. Following week, you see them in the data again, and there's another discount on a different brand. They buy that brand. The following week, they come back in again. There's an end cap display on one particular brand. There's no price discount, but of course price discounts are very common on end cap displays, and it's the one that's on the end cap display, but not discounted, that they buy. The following week, they have a coupon, and they buy the brand with the coupon. And the following week, again, there's another discount on yet another brand, and they buy that one. And this pattern continues. You know what the pattern is, right? What's the pattern they're following?
They're just finding whatever one they can find with a discount.
Whatever they can get it with a discount, okay? Now, let's say another week, this goes on for 14 weeks, and they're always changing brands to whatever's on discount. They walk in the following week. What are they going to buy?
If you follow their purchase behavior, you would assume that they're going to buy one that's on price discount.
Yes, but which one is that?
You'd have to use a zero order sort of processing function, and there'd be a probability based on the history of which brands they'd bought.
Well, the only way you're going to predict it is if you had a holdout sample on that consumer and you actually knew which products were on discount, and then it would be those ones that are in discount, okay?
Yeah.
So that's it, okay? So we know the mechanism for why they're buying, but can we really predict it in the future in which we have absolutely nothing other than the modeling prediction that you're coming up with, which will probably favor the brand that is the most promoted, okay, or the most likely to be promoted at that time. That's pretty much it. We have a hard time predicting in the future what they're going to buy, but we sure as heck know the mechanism.
Yeah.
Okay? So what happens in scanner panel data is that it's a very interesting kind of data because it's a very sparse kind of data. All you see is what they buy, and it's one at a time, slowly revealed over time.
Yeah, and because this is scanner data, it's for one supermarket.
Oh, let's say all supermarkets.
Okay, because I was going to say, because if you were looking at just one supermarket, then you're going to be missing a whole bunch of purchases that are, people buy from a different supermarket or a repertoire of different stores. But keep going. Sorry.
Well, let's say they never shop at Walmart, which doesn't participate in some of these research panels in the U.S., but say they never go there anyways, and in some of the various markets in which they do the scanner panel data, household surveys, and so forth, we can have a complete set, so long as it's not Walmart and a couple other stores. We know everything that they buy. All fine and good. So what you're stuck with in scanner panel data is a weird feature of the data. If it has a lot of regularity in the data, you might be able to infer the mechanism. But if it's incredibly varied, you can't predict. On the other hand, if it's always regular, you can predict, but you can't understand why. Now, to be honest, you go back to some of the conjoint kinds of stuff, and say you take a tradition of choice conjoint, and you give a consumer 5 different products that they can buy. They go and they choose one. Then you give them another set of 5 products. Which one would you choose among these 5? They choose one. Now, typically, we might have to ask somebody 32 to 64 times, give them a choice of these 5, which would you choose? And this is a lot of data that's required to actually infer the kind of decision mechanism that they have. Now, do we ever see that kind of detail in scanner panel data? The answer is we don't.
No, not typically, because they're usually about an annual period of time, and people aren't buying from the category that often.
Correct.
Yeah.
So what we end up with is there's these unusual consumers that always buy the same brand, and some other folks who sometimes move around and sometimes don't. But how do we sort of infer the mechanism, the choice mechanism for that household? We're having a hard time. And then the only way to get around that is to aggregate across households, and all of a sudden you run into aggregation biases there. All right? So this is a weird feature of scanner panel data. Now that's what my thesis was about, and it was about identifying sort of what part, an analysis system that identifies what aspects of the data you have sufficient variation to be able to say, you can answer these questions this way. But there's a big chunk of what goes on in scanner panel data that is just too regular that you can never infer. Now, this is very much a measurement tradition. I came up with a technique, conditional non-parametric sampling, segmentation, and transformation of sequential discrete choice data. That was the name of my technique.
What's the acronym for that one?
Weird. I don't know. But, the journals didn't like it.
Okay.
So
the reviewers from the journals, what sort of feedback were they giving you?
Yeah. Sent it into, sent it into Journal of Marketing Research. It went through 6 revisions.
Wow.
6 reviewers.
That's quite a lot of revisions.
2 editors.
Yeah.
And finally it was rejected.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, normally after about 3, you sort of, they either give up or they accept it. So to go through 6 and to get a rejection is quite a...
Yeah.
Yeah, wow.
6.
Wow. Over 2 editors, so that was multiple years of reviews then.
Multiple years worth of this was going on for years on end.
Yeah, wow.
Okay. So certainly was devastated at the end of that process.
Of course, that's huge. You would be expecting at that point.
But the thing was, there was a paper that came out shortly after that from Marketing Science. The editor had a wonderful editorial, and he talked about the worshipping of data, and that somehow or another we have confused ourselves into thinking that scanner panel data is the end-all, be-all of data, and it must be the absolute objective truth. But does it really have as much power in that data as we think it does? Now, of course, my argument was often scanner panel data doesn't have the power in the data to be able to make fine arguments about what's going on about consumer behavior from it. We can infer some things from it, and so those things are particularly valuable. You've already mentioned the double jeopardy phenomenon, which is a critically important one, and people sort of ignore the significance of these kinds of effects. But those are the things that we can see in scanner panel data and can see it quite well. But don't confuse yourself with the fact that that's everything there is to know about consumer behavior. There are things well beyond it. And that was the subject of the editorial in Marketing Science. Now, mind you, these folks were all figuring out these kinds of issues in parallel with me and many others, to where scanner panel data has some real weaknesses. It has a lot of strengths that you can't find any other way. Certainly use it for what it's strong for, but don't necessarily rely on it for insights that it's incapable of producing. Go to other methods that can give those kinds of insights. Now, of course, I think we went through sort of a decade or 2 of those kind of thinking, and by the end of, say, around 2000, we did come to this conclusion that the issues that I was raising really were important issues, but, my research had moved on by then, the field had moved forward, and then, of course, we discovered clickstream data, which, again, presents the exact same kinds of problems as scanner panel data, which is how informative is this data, okay? Now, a different kind of feature is there's usually not as much regularity in the data, in clickstream data. You don't see 27 purchases identical in clickstream data. But you also don't see the non-clickstream purchases that are out there, which are frequently the majority of purchases that folks have. So where does it fit in? How does it work? But again, is it telling us what we really want to know? It tells us important stuff. Those are important lessons we need to incorporate. But there is still a world out there that this is only one piece of. So these kinds of issues are around. They're valuable. They're worthwhile. I had the wrong theory at the wrong time, and it didn't go anywhere.
So it never saw the light of day?
It saw one portion of it. The logic that I just gave you showed up in a paper with Jerry Tellis in Journal of Advertising Research in 2011.
Okay.
All right, but it's just the logic of it, the intuition that scanner panel data is not the end-all, be-all. It is not sort of the objective judge everybody makes it out to be. In fact, that paper was very interesting. We started off at the beginning that if you were to characterize advertising and scanner panel data as characters from a film noir movie, advertising would be the beautiful femme fatale, okay, who's loyal to no one, and advertising is seen as the hard-boiled detective, okay, which, of course, the hard-boiled detective has biases, and those biases need to be understood and worked within. And that's pretty much how the paper starts, and the analogy of film noir goes through the entire paper. It's, it was one of the funnest papers to write, and Jerry still remembers that one as like, wow, we got away with this one. I can't believe we got away with that.
What's the title of the paper? Do you remember? So it's Journal of Advertising
Journal
Research.
of Advertising Research.
2011.
Yeah, I think it was 2011.
And who was your co-author on that one?
Jerry Tellis. And Jerry's one of the legends of advertising effectiveness research. And he started out doing scanner panel data kinds of stuff. I think he was the first one to actually show statistically significant effects of advertising in scanner panel data, which was just considered, wow, he actually came up with it. And he came up with the goods and showed that advertising had some effectiveness effect. Okay, isn't this wonderful? And then as soon as he publishes that, there's this editorial that shows up in the Wall Street Journal that says, how dare this guy tell us, go and say that the effects of advertising are so small? And it's like, you guys don't get it. We actually showed the effect. You should be glad.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's the weird things that happen. And yeah, but it was a fun paper to write. And it is the only time that the logic underlying or anything from my thesis has actually seen the light of day.
So what would you say that scanner panel data is really good for, and where would you advise the people who are listening that it's, perhaps they shouldn't be using it or trying to solve certain problems or understand certain answers to questions that they shouldn't be using scanner panel for?
Oh,
what are the strengths and weaknesses?
Strengths and weaknesses, I guess you can go back to that paper, but what are the strengths and weaknesses? We spend so much of our time focusing on this. It's hard for me to give you a succinct answer. The models that we produce, the good models on this data, are somehow or another trying to draw in more information. We started off, say, for example, in scanner panel data, looking at one product category only a very short period of time. And over time, we've started talking about, well, it can't just be one category. It has to be multiple categories. And the more data that we have, the better picture we're getting about why consumers are acting the way that they do. One of the trends currently in the literature is to move towards structural models. Some of these structural models, the economists can't stand because they say, oh, they impose too much structure. And it's like, well, if you don't impose the structure onto these scanner panel data, you end up with aggregation biases all over the place. So you got these constant trade-offs with scanner panel data. Honestly, the big thing that scanner panel data is best for, it's the scorecard.
Yeah.
Okay? Did you actually do well in terms of sales or not? How can you come up with that stuff without scanner panel data? At one time, we used warehouse withdrawals, okay, before we had scanner panel data. And that was like, you really couldn't see whether or not the ads worked. To whereas if you know when your ad's starting and you can see that sales pick up at that time, gosh, that sounds pretty good.
Yeah, and then you also have usually some sort of additional effect because some brands, when they advertise, they also have a price promotion attached to it. So how do you separate out the advertising versus the price promotion, sales increases?
That becomes the very difficult technical stuff and why you need the structure imposed from structural models. One of the things I do have to say is what not to use it for.
Yeah,
okay?
Very important.
Look, price promotions are a problem in scanner panel data. Because if you drop the price, the stuff moves. We all know this.
Yeah.
Okay? But at what point in time is this sort of, productive for a brand? And at what point in time is this sort of like heroin for an addict? Okay? Now, the addict is not the consumer. It's the brand manager.
Oh, yeah. They're addicted to those sales increases. Yeah.
So the first time you do it, you do a sales promotion. You do a sort of small sales promotion, and all of a sudden there's this sales increase, and gosh, this feels really good, and the rush is wonderful. And a few months go by, and you're really trying to get an increase in sales, and finally, okay, let's do another sales promotion. You do the same size. Okay, do you get the buzz? The same buzz as the first time? Of course you don't. Okay, the sales go up, but it's not quite as much. So then a few months later, you got to deliver results for the next quarter. All right, let's do another sales promotion, but we'll double the size of the price discount. Okay, all of a sudden you get the buzz again. Okay, and this pattern can keep continuing every 3 months. Okay, so let's say this goes on for a year, every 3 months. In time, it's going to be every 2 months, every month. And then what are you down to? Every other week. And we see plenty of categories at the stores where it's every other week. And it's like, how did they get themselves into these problems? Well, they got addicted to promotions, okay?
Yeah.
Now, I often say the purpose of advertising is to sell stuff at full price. That's it.
Yeah. Yeah. I have to agree because, I know some of the corporate sponsors who are operating in categories where a vast majority of their categories sold on price promotion. And whether it's their brand or their competitor's brand, that's just what's being sold.
Yeah.
And so is the full price really the price of the category, or is it the price promotion that's sort of the reference price for consumers? And it has to be the price promotion. If the bulk of their category is being sold on price promotion, then their reference price is 30 to 40% off of what their recommended retail price is.
Yeah. Look, I still remember there was a cereal that I bought in New Zealand. It was a fabulous cereal called Berry Berry Nice, and it's by a company called Hubbard's. I wish they sold it in Australia.
Yeah, I haven't heard of that one, yeah.
If I had to buy it in Australia, okay, I would easily buy it for $12, $15, maybe even $20 a box.
Wow.
Okay? I really love this stuff. It is
Yeah,
a
you must
unique
do.
product. Okay? Now, the funny thing is, full price in New Zealand was $6 per box. And for years, I would buy it for $6 per box, and I'd eat a box per week. So what eventually happened is they started doing price promotions on it. What do I do when it goes on price promotion?
I'm guessing you'd bulk up.
I'd bulk up,
Yeah.
okay? And, it got to a point to where every month or two, they would do another price promotion. So if they do a price promotion, it's like, $4 per box. Yep, I'd pay $15, $20 per box, but you know what? I'm going to buy it for $4, and I know it's going to be 2 months before the next sales promo, so guess what? I'm going to buy 8 boxes.
Yeah.
And the thing that would tick me off the most is you go to the store, and it's got the $4 promoted price, and of course they're sold out because other folks who are loyal to the product like me already hit them. Okay? So this is not good for your brand. A unique product I was willing to pay a lot of money for. Honestly, they can make a heck of a lot more money selling a lot fewer units.
Yeah, because the margin's there.
Yeah. So, look, folks paint themselves into a corner all the time with regards to price promotion. So this is something that has to be avoided. And it's avoided at the beginning. And what I sort of tell folks, there's a reputation with heroin. It only takes one time having it before you're hooked, okay? So price promotions are the same way. Don't do it. Don't do it, okay? Resist the temptation because you could be hooked after the first price promotion. Don't go down that route.
And so you see advertising as being a way of avoiding that. So you're putting money into creative advertising and then scheduling media effectively, and that allows you to sell the units at full price.
Ideally, if you're doing it right, that's what it should be doing.
Yeah. So what would you recommend for people who are listening to the podcast who maybe work in sort of media agencies or creative agencies? What are the academic findings potentially from your papers or your colleagues about creating effective advertising?
Okay, good point. Let me go back to some of the history.
Perfect.
So I was doing this stuff in scanner panel data, had this horrible experience with journal marketing research with 6 revisions, 6 reviewers, 2 editors.
Yeah, that's just crazy.
Okay. I have to figure out, what do I do now? Do I want to continue with this stuff or not? So I start thinking about what I want to do. And at the time, I'm teaching advertising. I'm teaching advertising because I like advertising, okay? And people tell me I'm good at this. Okay, that's fine. I thought I was good at scanner panel data, but obviously I wasn't. So, yeah, I have to start thinking about how do you design ads? You know, in the old-fashioned advertising curriculum, would learn all there is to know about how people process ads. But to become that point in the course where they'd have to have at least a week where they talk about how do you design an ad? This is what managers need to know.
Yeah.
And we actually had practically nothing to say. People would make this week up. Okay? Honestly, it should be most of the course, but we'd just have one flaky week where we talk about how we produce ads. All right? This is an embarrassment on our field. So pretty much out of that embarrassment of having nothing to teach about how to design ads, that's where the creativity stuff came from. And sort of little did I realize that, like, if price promotions aren't getting where you want to go, you kind of have to talk about advertising. So why can't folks come up with the advertising that they need? Okay? So, and in fact, one of the big papers was not published until about 2006. It took a long time to get this through the review process, went to multiple journals and the like. But eventually published in the Journal of Advertising, very good journal. Very pleased with it. So why do some folks, why don't clients get the advertising that they need? Well, they don't get the advertising they need. They get the advertising they deserve. And largely the answer comes back, and this is the surveys that we had done, and we have thousands of campaigns that we've studied over the years. If you're a good client, you get good work. If you're a crappy client, you get crappy work from the agency. Now, what's a good client?
Yeah, that was what my question was going to be. Yeah. What defines good and bad client?
Pretty much if you're open to what the agency's trying to say. It doesn't mean you necessarily have to do everything that the agency says. Yeah. But you have to be open because they're going to ask you questions. They're going to go down certain routes. And, be open to what they have to offer, okay? And those folks tend to get the best work. Typically what happens, and I've seen this plenty of times in client meetings, the client walks in and they say in all sorts of wonderful MBA speak, sales are down, we need a boost. Yeah. And they're smart enough to figure out, I'm not going to do a sales promotion. Okay? Cool. But that's it. They say that's our strategy. Sales are down, we need a boost. That's a strategy? No, that's a symptom. That's not a strategy. Okay? So immediately the agency comes back and says, well, who's your target market? Oh, and they'll perk up and say, 18 to 80-year-old male and female Australians. Is that a target market? 18 to 80, male and female.
Market, yeah.
It's the entire market, okay? And there's so many different educated ways, speaking MBA speak, that these brand managers will say, everybody. And the agency just sort of sits there and puts their fingers through their hair saying, oh my goodness, I can't believe they're that stupid, okay? Well, I don't think that the brand managers are really that stupid. They just can't articulate particularly well because nobody in their firms ever sort of asked them those kinds of questions. So when an ad agency asks them, well, who's your target market? They just say, oh, people who buy our stuff. So it's just they don't think like that. But you have to start thinking like that because the agency sort of says, well, what's your distinctive advantage? What are you going to do? What are you going to sell that's different? What can you offer that somebody else can't? The agency's looking for the angles. They know a bunch of successful angles that people can go for, okay? But what's the one for your brand, okay? Now, you guys do some very good work on the distinctive competencies of the brand. It might only be 2 or 3 different things.
Yeah.
Okay? But those are important, and you have to identify them in some way, shape, or form. You give that to an agency, then they can start saying, okay, these are the basics, and we can add this, and we can add that, and next thing you know, we've got a creative campaign for you.
Yeah. And that's exactly how we kind of see not necessarily the creative part of it, that's sort of Nicole's research there, but when you're starting to talk about the distinctive assets of a brand, it's very important to do that fundamental baseline research first to say, well, what are the things, whether they're logos, whether they're colors or characters or taglines that are we think are unique and famous for our brand, and then also for our competitors as well, and to see how they're performing. And then you kind of know what you can and can't incorporate into your creative. And that kind of allows the corporate sponsors of the Institute to then go to the agency with some empirical evidence to say, look, you're the creatives. You know how to work and create all of this, all the ads, whether it's television, whether it's online, whether it's radio. Here are the things that you cannot miss. Like, you have to use this color, you have to use this logo. And your job is to create an advertisement and a creative that gets eyeballs on screens or earballs to listen. And but these are the things that have to be kept. So that's sort of our approach, I suppose.
Well, it's other folks will have that approach, but they may not use the same language that you guys use. For example, years ago, I spent a lot of time studying the folks at Saatchi's who produce the Folgers campaign. Folgers is the number one brand of coffee in the U.S., a spectacularly successful brand, an incredibly strong brand. What are some of the distinctive assets that they have? Well, one of them is red, okay? Another is mornings, okay? So you can come up with a few more of these things. And those themes, when they sort of showed up in the ads, all of a sudden the copy testing just went through the roof. If you tried to vary from those things, people will say, what brand are you talking about? Because it's like they're waiting for the red. If they're talking about coffee and they've got the color red, they know it's Folgers. Now, you might say Folgers only once or twice in the ad, but if you've got those themes, they know it's a Folgers ad. Now, if a competitor tries to do a coffee commercial about mornings, people say, oh, that's a Folgers ad.
Yeah, because they're not paying that much attention to the ad.
Correct. Yeah. So these are important issues, and there are plenty of ways in which people can describe it. You have a particular, very scientific-based way of testing and finding and confirming that those kinds of specific assets are going to be important to the campaign and need to be incorporated in some way as an important aspect of the branding. Great. Others have other ways into the same kinds of issues, but it just emphasizes, this creative element. Yeah, we need some structure in there. It's not going to be a lot of structure, but enough structure. And these are things that brand managers, they know it, but they can't articulate it. Yeah. And then they tell the agency, we're selling 18 to 85 male and female Australians. And the agency just shakes their head and says, we don't know what to do with these people.
That's great. So that's sort of those elements of the creative and some of the Institute's research has looked at, I suppose, the role in which different types of advertising has had, whether it's using emotions that are, slightly emotional or highly emotional ads, and whether they're sort of joyous, happy, or sad type of ads. Have you looked into any of that sort of research before, and what's your views on that sort of stuff? Okay,
some of my early research was with my old advisor, Dave Stewart, and Dave taught me a lot about executional factors, and he had probably what was the state-of-the-art data set at the time that he worked with ARS, Advertising Research Systems, which at the time was the big copy testing service throughout the planet. He would have these scores in terms of the copy tests, and then content analyze the ads to determine what kinds of executional factors lead to what kinds of effects. Now, Nicole's thesis was a replication of this work. I've worked on this data as well. And this is the executional factors tradition, which we have. And it's a very strong tradition. It's a valuable tradition. But the question mark is, does this lead to better work? Now, the best case scenario is that there was a very small percentage of the strength of the ad from the copy tests that these executional factors predicted. It just wasn't as strong, okay? And talking with Nicole, she's continuing to find these kinds of small but significant effects in the data. And certainly, some of we're talking less than 10%. Now, it's still nothing to sneeze at. Yeah. But is this where the big effects are, okay? And the answer is no, okay? You shouldn't necessarily design an ad around the executional factors. So are there certain features of an ad that ad has to have? I'm not going to tell you that there is any feature that the ad has to have. Now, it might be something unique to the brand, the specific brand assets that you're talking about that the Ehrenberg Bass Group focuses on. Those are specific to brands. They're not to categories, okay? So would they show up in these kinds of large executional factors kinds of studies? Actually, they wouldn't show up. They'd be specific to the brand, not to all ads.
Yeah,
so
that's
you're
true.
not necessarily going to find executional factors that usually are the end-all, be-all. They are much more higher-level variables. Rachel Kennedy, one of your colleagues, and I just had lunch, and we were talking about that exact issue. A lot of the executional factors don't pan out to have as much effect as we think they should have. But what does are some of the higher levels variables that would, say, relate to strategy in some way, shape, or form about what kind of benefit is offered by a particular brand. And again, that's going to be different depending on what brand you're talking about.
It's very interesting. Maybe if we switch pace a little bit at the moment. So you have quite an interesting and actually a long history of publishing. But you've also got a long history of reviewing. So you've been twice, you've been Reviewer of the Year for the Journal of the Academy of
Journal of Academy of Marketing Science.
Marketing Science, that's right. And, or JAMS is the acronym which I
JAMS.
constantly use. Top tier journal, worldwide thought of as one of the top 4 journals, at least the people I know anyway. So to be able to be recognised by such a distinguished journal and the best of the reviewers for that journal, for people who are reviewing journals themselves and people who are trying to publish in these types of journals, what would your advice kind of be? How can we be better reviewers? How can we be an award-winning reviewer like yourself? Or how could we respond as an author to a reviewer of your quality?
Okay. Folks send a whole bunch of different kinds of papers into journals. And one of the things that's useful to think about the way that as a reviewer, you kind of, the paper you see often is a function of a very serious, intense academic working virtually alone somewhere far away in a dark office. Okay?
Okay.
And they often don't talk to anybody about their research because, well, either they're afraid to talk to other people about their research or more typically, most people don't care. All right? So they're sitting there, they're working alone by themselves. They have this really great idea and they write it up and they send it off to a journal. And then 3 anonymous people sit there and criticize the paper. This is not a great system, okay, but it is the system that we have. So when you're writing a review, you just have to imagine there's this lone writer off somewhere who never talks to anybody, and this is where they're going to get the feedback. Your purpose as a reviewer is not to criticize the work, okay, and not to evaluate it. It's usually obvious whether or not it's really going to be really good work or not, okay? And it's not people think that it's hard to make these decisions about is this good enough. It's actually a fairly easy decision. And after you're familiar with the literature, you can pretty much say, that's a winner, that's a no, this is a maybe.
After reading it once or at what point?
It doesn't take a lot.
Yeah.
Sometimes you can just skim the thing and figure that one out, okay? And the reviewers often really see the same thing over and over and over again. And you have 3 reviewers and they all think something very similar about this paper. But your purpose as a reviewer is not to make a judgment on the paper. Well, obviously you have to, and you have to say revise and resubmit, accept, go away, whatever it happens to be. But your purpose is to help that person do better research.
Okay.
That's it. Nobody can substitute for that. They're working by themselves. This is the way they get feedback, and this is the only feedback they're probably ever going to get.
Okay.
So when they send the paper, and sometimes they're sort of asking the wrong question, and you have to say, you know what? You really should be asking this question because that's the relevant one, okay? And tweak them towards that regards. sometimes obviously there's methodological flaws in papers. There actually aren't too many papers that come through with methodological flaws. It is more typical. It's like, why the stuff did they do that? Why did they ask that question? They could have asked something simpler and done something more powerful. This happens routinely. Or it's sort of like, this is really nice work, but they don't realize what they've got.
Yeah.
They're actually studying this other issue, not the issue that they think that they are. One of the biggest problems, and this is just one of many problems, is, say, they've got some scales that they use, multi-item scales, all fine and scientific, follows the academic traditions, but they misinterpret what their scales are. They call it construct X. When you read the items, and it's like, no, that's construct Y, and so forth. You really have to be helpful. Much of a reviewer's role is to give away ideas. I still remember.
Wow. I've never heard of it that way.
To give away ideas.
Never heard of it that way before.
No, it is. I still remember I asked one of my colleagues, a very good colleague, to review a paper. And I was the area editor at the time. And so he went off, he wrote an incredibly competent review, criticized the paper for all the correct spots, and then that was it. Okay? And then I wrote the AE report, and the other reviewers all said competently, this is what's bad about the paper. But my AE report, area editor report, was about how should you do better work. Now, that paper was clearly, it was going to be rejected.
Yeah.
It was not up to the standard, okay? But I went and said, look, these are the kinds of issues you should be focused on. These kind of methods are the kinds of things that you should be using. And I go through and I lay out the entire format. This is what you should be doing. Now, my colleague, he was in the same department as me, and after I had sent out the AE report, he gets to see the AE report and what the other reviewers' comments were and so forth. You never get to see who the authors were, of course. And he stops by my office and he says, Scott, you just pretty much told them, you did all the work for them. And it's like, no, they still have to do the research.
Yeah.
Okay? They have to go out and do this work. But you laid out the roadmap for them. And it's like, that's what we do. If you want to advance the field, that's what you have to do. Now, one of those, I can almost guess, one of those big Best Reviewer Awards, I know what I got it for. There was one particular paper, it came into JAMS. It had a very interesting effect. The authors themselves couldn't understand why it was that effect. And what it was that, I'm trying to remember this particularly well, and I'm probably going to screw up and get a lot of the details wrong, but I'll go ahead and try it anyways. So what they were doing is they were looking at the effects of, I don't know what you call them now, sort of, who are they? They're sort of consultants that work in the finance industry. They make recommendations on whether or not they think firms are doing the right thing. And it's a, how do I say this? So it's a semi-finance paper, to whereas they were analyzing stock price returns, okay? And it was these analysts who seemed to have the effect, and that if the firms, they were the ones determining whether or not, when a company announced a new strategy, the announcement of the new strategy didn't seem to affect share price, at least until these analysts gave it a tick.
Okay, it's like an endorsement type of...
It's an endorsement kind of stuff, okay? And it's like, why was it these analysts that make the big difference, not the announcement, the strategy, okay? Well, one of the things that's about these analysts is they're largely allowed to go talk to folks in the firms and question them and the like. Ordinary investors can't, but they're allowed to. Yeah. And then they can go and make their recommendations. So pretty much who they have to appeal to is not the market in general, but rather to these analysts, because the analysts are sort of the gatekeeper of the information.
Yeah.
Okay? Now, the authors didn't get this, okay? And I looked at it and it's like, yes, this is a two-staged kind of model. This is cool. And so what I went and did, I said, okay, guys, I'm going to write your introduction for you.
Okay.
Okay? And I sat there and I rewrote the entire introduction for them. Now, mind you, they went and they rewrote what I said, Okay, so it's definitely their paper. But I gave them an example of this is exactly what you should be talking about. Okay, and I laid it out. And it was going to be one of these papers that it's like, it's a really strong method, but these guys don't have a clue what they've got. Okay, they got something fabulous, but they don't know how to make sense of it. I told them exactly this is how you make sense of it. Okay, and I suspect it's for that one review that I wrote that I got the best paper award, because all of a sudden it's like it went from being something that such a strong method, we don't want to reject it in the first round, but we don't know how it's going to progress to publication. And I laid out the roadmap. You do this, paper did fabulous. Okay?
Yeah.
And that's what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to give away ideas.
Give away ideas.
And
I think because I'm quite early on in my reviewing academic career. I think I've reviewed about 20 journals now, roughly. And it's the first time I've heard of that type of approach. I've always tried to help the authors improve their work, whether I think that it should be accepted to the journal or not. I always try to give constructive feedback and to help them to understand maybe some flaws in their method or help them to see how they could write the paper better. But I'm going to take that approach from now on. I think that's really good. Let's see how I go.
Yeah.
Maybe by the end of my career, I'll win a Best Reviewer award.
There's sort of this idea of, and some people don't want to do this. They can actually think that, and they say, the data set's great. If they position the paper this way, it would actually fly. And there's plenty of folks I know that could say that about papers, but they won't say it in a review. And I'm thinking, why are you not saying that in the review? And it's like, oh, well, maybe that's a paper I should publish. And it's like, oh, for Pete's sake, you got enough work. All right?
Yeah.
There's always another idea.
Oh, science never ends. And I don't know any academics who are sitting around thinking, if only I had an idea. I mean, that's part of the reason I find professors like David Corkindale, for example, who still works here but is retired, hasn't retired.
Yeah.
It's because he has all these ideas that he hasn't done, and he's had a long career. They don't ever end these ideas. So why do you need to this other one? Help someone else publish and advance the field.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a way better way of going about it.
And don't sit there and sort of hog your ideas and say, ooh, that's mine, that's mine. It's like, oh, for Pete's sake, we're in this wonderful field to whereas ideas are free, just give them away because there's always another better one that's going to be around the corner.
That's very true. And do you find that with like the supervision of PhD students? So like obviously you have to help them, guide them to finding and identifying a gap in the literature and moving them forward. So you have to also be not selfish in those ideas as well, and to share them and to help them move forward for their career. Is that similar approach?
Yeah, but I sort of got you made a phrase that sounded like fingernails on a chalkboard to me. Okay. And that was find a gap in the literature. Oh, for Pete's sake, you don't find gaps in the literature.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah, fair call.
Don't even go down that route, because then you're sort of filling nooks and crannies that are not the main thing that everybody's interested in. No, do not go down the route of finding the gap in the literature. You figure out what you want to do that's important.
Yeah.
Eventually you'll sort of be able to figure out that actually was a gap in the literature. But that's not how you find the gap in the literature. You have to go some other route. And when you realize what you're doing is a gap in the literature, then maybe you know that you're doing something that's good. But it's not the way forward. It's the way that you know that you've arrived.
Okay. Yes, that's a really good way of looking at it, I think, actually. So you've I went to your presentation yesterday, and one of the things that you mentioned was all about the positioning of the story and giving, I guess, the reviewers, but also us, the readers at the end of a story to go along with your data. You mentioned that quite often papers won't get rejected because of like method issues or anything like that.
Oh, well, they get rejected for methods issues.
But if it's strong, it's sometimes the positioning of the paper that sort of.
Yeah.
Did you want to give us an example there? You spoke yesterday about, you had a article that the reviewers didn't originally like the story.
It was a qualitative piece. It was recent. A doctoral student, John Parker, really sharp guy, who wants to do some qualitative research on sort of message strategy in advertising. So most of it's on message strategy, and part of it's about insight. Beautiful data, lots of great interviews. I thought very insightful stuff. He writes it up. He's got various themes that he comes out with. And in fact, some of this stuff is a beautiful model of what insight is and so forth. Now, the reviewers sort of look at this and sort of say, there's a lot here. We think this is two papers, one on message strategy and the other's on insight. So would like you to focus on insight. We'll reject this paper, but please submit one focused on insight. So that's what's called a reject and resubmit, which is very uncommon.
Yeah, I was going to say, I haven't even heard of that before.
Yeah, Journal of Advertising doesn't like to do that.
Yeah.
But yeah, they really like the topic. But we know that this is going to be more than 6 months' work, so it's technically a reject. But we'd love to see the paper. Please give us that. Okay, all fine and good. And we write that paper, and again we pull out the data, the wonderful quotes that we have on insight and how it works and what it is. Again, I think it's great work, very insightful, pardon the pun. But the reviewers still weren't getting it. They weren't getting it at all. And they knew that what we were saying was important, but they couldn't see why it was important. How is this relevant? How does it fit in? And in fact, they wanted a theory. Okay? And it's like, well, there isn't good theory in this area. So why do we have to have a theory? All right. In fact, we go through several rounds with this, and the editor's getting really stroppy with us, saying, for Pete's sake, fix the paper or I'm going to have to reject it. And it's unusual how many rounds we went through. I can't remember how many we went through. It was like 2 or 3. And finally, the editor sends us the letter saying, this is it. Okay, it's make or break. We know there's elements of this stuff that are really quite good, and that's why we keep asking you to redo it. But, we need something more, okay? And I wish I could remember the exact ways that the editor phrased it, but it was really, thoughtful, well-written, and it's like, we need structure. We need to understand where you're coming from. So finally, it's like, okay, I don't think the problem is lack of theory, because I feel like there was enough theory in the paper, even though the reviewers said it was a problem with theory. Okay? So it's like, this is, to me, and I've seen this pattern before, the problem's the positioning of the paper. Okay? They're not getting into the right frame of reference from the beginning. And it needs to be from the get-go, from the first paragraph, that they know where it's going and why it's going. So we go back, or at least I go back to a theory where we started, and it was a theory called absorptive capacity. And this is a management theory, okay? And absorptive capacity comes from a very interesting tradition. It's, you might have a firm in Silicon Valley, and some firms are particularly good at absorbing technical knowledge from other firms and then doing something with it and producing innovative products, to whereas other firms are not anywhere near as good at absorbing information. And what Cohen and Leventhal are the authors, the originators of this theory, and they say, look, it's not like absorptive capacity is something that everybody does well. You need to invest in specific assets to be able to absorb well. Okay? It's like you got to buy a radio set to get the radio waves to listen to the radio program. And it's a lot of investment that you got to have in order to listen and listen well. Okay? And then incorporate it. Now, some later work can go through and identify that there's 3 steps. There's sort of figuring out what the really critical information is. Then there's articulating that in a way in which the firm can understand it. You have to take all this massive information and boil it down. And then you have to take that information and exploit it. So what's happening with insight is an account planner has to go out and actively go out and find the insight or find information, okay? And then in the second step, distill it down to an insight. It's usually just a sentence. Wow. And then they hand that off to a creative, and a creative can exploit it in some way. So there's 3 steps. The first 2 steps of absorptive capacity are what account planners do. And that was the data that we have, is how account planners deal with insight. and then they pass it off to a creative, and then the creative can exploit. So all we had to do was say, look, these are the steps from absorptive capacity. It's 3 steps. So identify what information they need, articulate it into an insight, and then it gets exploited. The paper is about the first 2 steps of that creative process. It shows up in the first paragraph. I swear, it's like the reviewers all had this massive sigh of relief. Finally, okay, we get this. Yes, this is really nice. We see how it all ties together now. We weren't seeing it before. This is just great. It was entirely a matter of positioning. Okay? Once we got it, it was smooth sailings.
It's good to hear. So you've had quite a long and successful career.
I'm not done, by the way.
No, obviously you're not done. But I mean, you're an associate editor on 2 very prestigious journals, multiple awards. I meant it as a compliment.
Okay.
Where I'm coming at with this is, did you have, were there certain people in your life, or especially early on in your career, or maybe even now, that you had as sort of mentor figures, or people who helped guide you or you sought advice from? Is there anything like that that you've sort of relied on?
Those folks are there. You interact with people all the time, and they give you sort of informal feedback, and you kind of have to figure it out what folks are telling you, okay? Often the kind of feedback it's really sparse, okay? And you have to make sense of what advice people give you. I'm not sure if I'm describing it particularly well. You have to sort of be open to what folks are telling you and know what advice you don't want to take and what advice really needs to be central. Years ago, I started at the University of Texas at Dallas. I was hired by Frank Bass.
Okay.
Bass is on the door of your institute, and it's named after Frank. And so I was leaving UT Dallas, and I was coming to the University of Waikato in New Zealand. And I had a piece of parting advice from one of the faculty members there. I won't say the person's name.
Sure.
It wasn't Frank. Okay, Frank, by the way, I still remember. It was the only time he came to my office, and he heard it. I had the offer to go down to New Zealand. It was a minor university at the time. It still is. And he walks down to the office and he says, "New Zealand, it is the most beautiful place on earth, along with South Africa. I think you'll like it. I think you're making a good choice for what you want to achieve, and I strongly support you." That was it. Okay. The rest of the time you want advice from Frank, you have to go have lunch with him or you go to his office. But he came down to my office to give me his blessing. Okay, all fine and good. Now, this other faculty member there, a great guy, I still get along with him. We had lunch at the last marketing science. So the guy says, I had a paper at the time that was accepted in the Journal of Consumer Research. Okay, it was on advertising. And the person says, "You know, Scott, I know you got a JCR out of this one, but honestly, this advertising research, it's like popcorn, okay? You kind of eat it, it's satisfying, but there's not much to it, okay? I want you to focus on the models more, okay?" And it's like, really? Okay, well, initially I took his advice. I focused on the models. I kept on revising this paper 6 times. It never went anywhere, okay? All fine and good. But, you know, there came a certain point in time in which I kind of had to say, was that good advice? Okay? What did I do? I decided to do advertising creativity. Now, I will name the person who wrote this to me. It was my advisor, Dave Stewart. So I pitched the idea to him in an email saying, "You know what? I'm thinking about advertising creativity. What do you think about this as a route for research?" And I give, you know, a half a page to a page of detail on this. Dave writes back a 4-page email.
Wow.
And he says, "These are all the reasons why you should not do it." Okay?
Jeez.
Now, Dave's one of the leading advertising researchers out there. His work's classic. It's fabulous. I have ultimate respect for him. And by the way, right now we're talking about writing a paper on consumer responses to creative advertising. So, I mean, Dave's come around in terms of the opinion. But, initially at the time, what kind of work was there? Okay, you had Art Cover doing a few things, okay, and you had Doug West doing a few things, but that was pretty much about it. And they just picked off a couple of issues with regards to it. There was no systematic kind of study, and folks sort of said, yeah, Art's different. He went on to become editor of the Journal of Advertising Research, so he did quite well for themselves. Doug West went on to become the editor of Journal of Advertising Research and the editor of the International Journal of Advertising. They both turned out to be it was a good move for them to move in that direction. But initially, this didn't seem like it was going to pay off. It was a big risk, and here it is, the guy's going after more popcorn, okay? And that was advice I didn't take. And it was good that I didn't take the advice. But there's still other advice to whereas I pick up the hint and it's like, okay, what do I do with this? How do I make sense of this? There's a recent paper on rhetoric and advertising, okay? And we presented the paper at ICORIA, one of the big conferences, and people yawned. Or at least I should say, a lot of people yawned. Other folks were jumping up and down saying, this is so exciting, we love it. But other folks yawn. That doesn't sound right, okay? And in fact, one of the folks is your own Rachel Kennedy. She was an examiner for Alex's thesis. She saw an earlier version of the rhetoric paper in his thesis. And by the way, Rachel made a very explicit point saying, what came out in the Journal of Advertising Research was considerably better than what I had seen in the thesis. Well, we had benefit of feedback. Part of it was Rachel's feedback. But you have to take the advice and figure out, what do I do with this stuff? Okay, how do I make sense of it? How do I improve the paper? Because I did actually think that the theory was good. But the problem was, how do I make it relevant? Okay, now Alex wrote this great theory about rhetoric, but it was the positioning of the work. Why is this relevant? How does it fit? What does it say about the field? Because the predominant way in which people view our field is consumer information processing. It's not about the production of ads, okay? So what that paper tries to do is flip things around, that what our field should be about is about the production of advertising, okay? How do you produce a good ad? Now, obviously, how consumers respond to ads fit within the issue of how do you produce good ads. But there's a matter of emphasis that's hugely different between the two. You look at the Journal of Advertising, almost everything in there is about how consumers respond to executional factors in ads. That's at least half of the field, if not more, okay? But what our field should be at least half of it about is how do you produce advertising. Now that's the kind of positioning that shows up in the rhetoric theory. And it specifically, says, look, we have this problem in the field that we kind of think advertising should be more than just consumer information processing applied to advertising. We feel there has to be more. Well, of course, there is more. It's about producing ads.
Yeah.
And it's about creativity. And creativity is not just about the creative department. Creativity is about going from sort of this strategic need that firms have to actually some kind of content that shows up in the media. Sometimes it's a paid ad, sometimes it's not. So yeah, that's a different kind of problem. It's framed in a different way. It leads to different kinds of research issues and problems and contexts. I think that's what Rachel appreciated about it. She may not say that my way of talking about how we produce ads is the best way. She has her own views, and certainly she's another competent researcher, and she's got a lot of competent things to say about, no, Scott, it's not this, it's this. But we still are of the same ilk of, it's about producing ads that work, not these are executional factors that do certain things to consumers.
Yeah, it's a good way of thinking about it. So you've mentioned a couple of different conferences already. What conferences would you recommend that academics attend, or maybe someone from industry? Because quite often they're not necessarily aligned. So I quite often ask people this question just to give people an insight as to potentially if they're planning their next year or asking for funding to go somewhere, what would you recommend?
Okay. I hate to say for practitioners, a lot of the stuff that we do in advertising is not relevant to them. And my fear is if they went to something like the 3A's conference or ICORIA, they'd be so turned off with what academics do that just sort of like the next time an academic calls them up, they'd hang up on them.
Yeah.
Okay? It's just so far removed from the kinds of issues that they talk about. There are serious problems. Okay? Where can I recommend that a practitioner go to talk to advertising academics?
Sure. Or any. Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to say something that'll sound like an ad for you guys, but they should call you guys and say, come and give us a presentation. And that's who they should be talking to. There's maybe 10% of academics are focused on this. How do you produce ads? Talk to those folks, but they're not going to be the bulk of the folks that show up at conferences.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's the caveat. Now, what should young academics go to? All right. I hate to say this. I'm going to tell you what not to go to.
That's an equally good answer.
Don't go to a huge conference with 1 million people there. You won't talk to anybody, or at least you won't have a serious conversation with anyone. Yeah. You want something small where senior people are there. Now, I'm going to say nasty things about one conference. I probably shouldn't even name its name. I started going to this conference years ago, and it was pretty much all the senior people there, and they were there from the first sessions to the end of the day. And you could go around, talk to them, have chats, talk to them about research ideas. I have an idea about this. What do you think? They give you feedback. That's the way that conference used to be. And it was a conference of 100 to 150 people. Okay? Over time, it's gotten bigger. At the last one, I think it was over 1,000 people.
Wow.
Okay? Now, it just so happens, because I know the senior people from years ago, for example, I'm sitting there looking, checking out which session I want to go to. I'm reading the board with the things on it because I had lost my program. And I look up, and it's Berger Winterfeld. Okay? Now, Berger was one of my old lecturers when I was MBA program. Okay? And he was very influential in choosing about PhDs and this, that, and the other. Now, Berger is well known in the management field. Wernerfeld, 1984, is cited 1 million times. It is on the resource-based view of the firm. Mind you, I was taught resource-based view of the firm by Berger, the way Berger wrote it in the 1984 paper. Okay, everybody else cites it as something different. Okay, or at least they put words into Berger's mouth that he actually didn't say.
Academic equivalent of like the Chinese whispers game, I suppose.
There you go. Okay, so I think I understand what Berger was saying, and it has definitely influenced me. And so Berger's walking down the hall. Berger, how are you? Hello, how are you? And so forth. We start talking about research, and we had good, productive conversation. But was Berger there the whole time? He was actually there more than most senior people. Another senior colleague that I was have had a lot of interaction with before, a guy named Harold Van Herdy. He was at Waikato where I was. I hired him in years ago. He is now at University of New South Wales. I could go up and talk to them, but these folks, they sort of show up for a few minutes and then they leave. Okay? They're not there all the time. Okay? So this is a problem because you get to these big, huge, unwieldy conferences, you can't talk to anybody.
Yeah.
Now, because I knew these folks, it's like, oh, Berger's here. I'll go talk to Berger. And Berger's like, yeah, I don't know anybody here. Glad that you're here. Let's have a talk. Okay?
Yeah. Because they can be quite daunting, really, because there are so many people.
Yeah, because they still run into the same problem of, I don't know who all these people are. Okay? And it's like, if you're in a great city, like I think that one was in a really fabulous capital of Europe, it's like, let's go into town and have some fun, sightsee. Easy distraction from a conference. So don't go to those.
Okay.
Go to small ones in your specialty area where people hang out at the conference.
Okay. That sounds like excellent advice, actually. So, marketers, we read quite a bit, whether it's industry publications or books or articles or anything. Do you have a particular book, it doesn't have to be marketing related, that is your favourite or something that you would recommend for people who are listening to the podcast?
Hey Whipple, squeeze this.
Hey Whipple, squeeze this.
Luke Sullivan's book on creativity.
Okay.
He's a old-fashioned creative. He wrote this book about how ads are really produced. It's absolutely wonderful. It's charming. It's got great stories. It's got great content. Is he an academic? I think he actually works in academia now, but he mostly teaches. He doesn't do research. Yeah. But this is a great book. Hey Whipple, squeeze this.
Hey Whipple, squeeze this. I'll add that to the... I've got a stack of books I have to read now from this podcast because I've been asking this question so much.
Yeah.
And all great recommendations as well. So you mentioned before that you wouldn't recommend people in industry attend these conferences because they might be a little bit disheartened by what they see from the academic side of things. How would you feel is the best way to bridge this gap, I suppose, between people who are doing advertising research and then people who are practicing advertising? How can they be or how can academics produce more relatable work or usable work for industry?
Academics have a secret problem, okay? They don't get to talk to anybody in industry. And therefore, it's not surprising they flutter off into the nanosphere in irrelevant issues because there is no practitioner telling them, excuse me, this is an important topic. Can you please look at this?
Yeah, this is what we're struggling with at the moment.
All right. So you guys spend a lot of time with folks in industry. You don't have that problem, okay? If anything, your problem is more the other way, to whereas academics will say, where's your frickin' theory?
Yeah, that's the exact issue we have.
So, yeah, that's all fine and good. What you need is somebody that can bridge the two.
Yeah.
What my recommendation is, if you're someone who works in branding or advertising and the like, go pull out the Journal of Advertising Research. Go look for stuff that you think is interesting in that journal. Now, this journal tries to bridge academia and practice. Go and find the folks in that journal that you think are doing interesting stuff related to what you're trying to understand. Then call those people.
Yeah.
That's what I recommend.
That's a good way of going about it, I think. So some of the audience that would be listening to this podcast are sort of young, ambitious marketers, whether they're sort of in industry or academia. What would your advice be for them to move along in their career to, I guess, progress and to succeed well? Would you have any advice for them?
Okay. I feel like I've been giving that advice to a lot of folks here at the University of South Australia. If you're a youngster and you want to get ahead, it's pretty obvious. You want a Journal of Marketing, Journal of Marketing Research, Journal Academy of Marketing Science, Journal of Consumer Research, or Marketing Science article. You want one of those 5. Okay? That's it. How do you get one of those 5? Oh, well, then that's the problem.
That is
okay.
The problem.
Everybody else wants those articles, those places in those journals, and about half of the space in those journals is largely, nobody plans it that way, largely reserved for folks who have published in those journals before. So if you want to break into the set, it's only half of those journals, half of the slots in those journals that are open to you. You pretty much have to do stunning work. Okay? The question, of course, is how do you do stunning work? Okay? You got to have the methods that those journals want.
Yeah.
Okay? And you have to have the theories that those journals want. Now, the problem is if you do things by looking at what's in those journals and you try to identify the gap in the literature and fill that gap, that is absolute, complete, and utter disaster. Do not do this. Okay? Smarter people than you have gone through and tried to do that route and have failed already. Okay? You need to bring something new to the table, and that's the only way you're going to have a hope of getting into these journals. How do you get that new thing into the table? Easy. Go talk to a manager, pick their brains, and they will tell you things that we academics don't know that we're supposed to worry about. then you have to package the study to illustrate that kind of information. And depending on how well you do that, determines whether or not you get into those key journals.
So, great insight. I hadn't heard of that one before, which is excellent. So I've had a great time speaking to you today, Scott. So thank you for taking your time out and giving us all some excellent advice. The question that I always like to end on is just as a broad sort of concept. What would your advice be for people? I suppose in their life, what sort of life advice would you want to pass on to people to? If there's one sort of saying or anything like that you'd want to transfer over.
There's something similar that came up recently. I got an email from a fellow at a university I used to work for, Waikato specifically, and it appears that he just heard a radio broadcast that he forwarded on to me. And it was an interview with a young entrepreneur in New Zealand who just sold sort of a tech business for over $100 million. Okay, so he's done quite well for himself, and he's a youngster. He's only been out of school for a dozen years, and he was one of my students. And 3 times in that interview, he referred to me. Now, I was thinking, a person said, "Go, Scott, you got to go listen to this. The guy's done quite well, and he's mentioned you multiple times."
Wow.
I was thinking, he would have sort of said something about what I taught him about creativity, for example, and because he's this tech entrepreneur,
thought as well.
It would be that. Actually, it wasn't any of that. It was life advice I gave him. Okay, and I think the life advice that I got through to him, there were 2 things that he took away from it. So we're chatting, and I find out that he was one of the Vietnamese boat people that escaped out of Vietnam. Now, I don't remember exactly what the survival rate of folks who got onto boats in Vietnam and took the difficult crossing overseas, but they were finding boats with dead people all the time. And they estimated that maybe only 10% of the folks who left ever survived.
Wow.
He was one of the folks that survived. They made it to Hong Kong, and then he got refugee status in New Zealand. So I said, look, you're already a winner. You survived a very difficult passage. And all of a sudden it's like, really? I'm just being alive. I'm a winner. And it's like, yes, you are. So that really stuck with him because he really didn't understand what that was. His parents would never talk about it. And I could explain, this is what was happening at the time. And, this is probably why your parents left. They were ethnic Chinese, escaping purges in Vietnam at the time and the like. Okay, all fine and good. That was one piece of advice. It set sort of his perspective. Again, it's not about marketing. The second thing was sort of do what you love. Okay? And I think if I remember, I said, do what you love and then figure out how to make money. He actually misinterpreted it, do what you love and then you'll make money. Okay? Or something like that. I can't remember his exact wording. But he put his own tweak onto it. But the phrase from me is, you have to figure out what you love. And he said, there were 2 things I love. Okay? One was martial arts. Okay? And the other is computers. Okay? And he looked at his martial arts coach and said, does he make any money? No, he doesn't. So I'm not going to do that. But there's money in computers. I'll go down that route. And gosh, the guy did incredibly well. He did what he loved. And, one of those things, it's like if you do what you love and you don't make any money, so you still got to do what you love. Okay? But much of the time when you do what you love, you actually figure out a way to make money out of it. And gosh, this guy made money, heaps. Okay? And I'd like to think, made the world a better place because he did what he loves. Yeah. This is not advice about creativity. This is advice about being human. So I guess if you want a closing comment from me, whether you're an academic, whether you're a practitioner, wherever you find yourself, do what you love.
Do what you love. Couldn't think of a better way to finish. Once again, thank you, Scott. I really appreciate it.
Thanks. I've enjoyed it.
Hey guys, it's Zac Anesbury here with just a couple of quick reminders. If you've enjoyed today's podcast, then make sure you subscribe so you never miss an episode. There are plenty more interviews to come with some of the world's leading marketing academics and practitioners. You do not want to miss these. In the meantime, if you're looking for another way to connect, then follow me on Twitter at Zac Anesbury. That is ZACANESBURY for my take on the marketing issues of the day.